Really great to be here. Really pleased to have the opportunity to talk to you all about this topic, and really a hot topic at the moment, driverless cars, automated vehicles. My background is as a psychologist, actually. So I joined Transport Research Laboratory to work in the human factors and simulation team, studying driver behavior, driving performance, and doing all those kind of studies, looking at distraction, looking at the effects of alcohol, drugs, fatigue. You quickly start to think, well, actually, maybe we should let the vehicle do some of the driving rather than us fallible humans. So I got into vehicle automation through that route. So the techie questions, I'll do my best, but my background is in understanding driver behavior. But I know enough to get by, and happy to see if we can answer your questions. So the presentation today is about the ethics of driverless cars and what they should do in the event of a collision, or a collision that they might find unavoidable. And I'm sort of duty-bound to include the two pictures that everyone includes when they're talking about artificial intelligence and machine ethics and so on, really thinking about the situations where machines might choose to result in injury of their operators or users. And as it's a talk on driverless cars, I'm also duty-bound to include a picture of Knight Rider. And maybe it suggests we should just avoid machines with red eyes or something. But when you think about ethics, ethics is the philosophy around what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad. And there are three different types. Deontological ethics, so where ethical behavior is to follow the rules. Consequential ethics, where you try the good behavior, the ethical behavior is the one that produces the best outcomes. And then virtue ethics, where the behavior itself is what an ethical behavior is that which is seen as being most virtuous. And this all kind of originates in the Greek philosophers and so on. And as we go through the talk, I'll explain why automated vehicles can't really follow either of the ethical principles of either of those, any of those philosophies. So I'm sure you'll recognize a picture of one of the early iterations of the Google car. This is the one from about 2010. This was the one when they made their first announcement that they'd done 140,000 miles of automated driving in California. Now they're up to 1.2 million with a whole fleet of automated vehicles, 1.2 million miles of driving. And you can see it's got some sensors on the front bumper and a spinning LiDAR sensor on the roof. Really fantastic achievement. But it's not the first automated vehicle that there's been. So if I play the animation, this is one that we had back in the 1950s. So very similar spinning radar sensor on the roof this time. And it was capable of driving for itself and avoiding obstacles and so on at 1 mile per hour. So it wasn't the most practical of vehicles. But we did get a bit further in the 60s and 70s. And this is our Citroën, beautiful Citroën DS, going around our test track, following an electric cable buried in the road, and using these two coils on the front bumper. They're detecting the offset of the vehicle from that buried cable and adjusting the steering to make sure it follows the path. And it was here where we perfected the two-handed wave behavior that everyone chooses to adopt in driverless cars these days. But it's very accurate. It was tested up to speeds of 80 miles per hour. It was tested on snow, and it did very well. It was really the practicality around digging up all the roads to lay buried electric cables for these vehicles to follow, and how you would power those cables, that led to this kind of not being pursued as the way to achieve automation. And we're getting there now with the power of computers and the sensors and visual processing and so on that is now achievable. Fitted the same system to sort of more practical vehicles. So there was the Daimler Dart bus, dual mode bus, and a Ford Cortina. And my background is in human factors, and there's a few things I like to pick out from the Cortina. This was a dial just next to the steering wheel for adjusting the cruise control speed, so you could go faster or slower using this dial. A lot of people worry about the process by which you go from manual driving to human driving. How does that work, and how do you switch back to the human driving again? Well, in the Cortina, it was a metal toggle switch, system on, system off. And then another thing people worry about is the liability concerns. What happens in the event of a collision? Who's at fault? Well, in the Cortina, there was call the lab. Same phone number today, incidentally. So coming up to date, and there's no sound, so I can't play the video that was in there. But it was a road test that the Top Gear team did of the Range Rover, and they compared it to a American military vehicle driving through like a battle scene. And the discussion ends up with them saying Google are inventing a driverless car, and Oxford University inventing a driverless car, but can't see the point at all. They're talking about I could put the children in it and send them off to school, but other than that, utterly pointless. So, yeah, at least they were the three most influential men in the UK motor industry saying it was utterly pointless. So why is it such an important topic now? Well, there are a number of reasons. I think one of them is the use of time, that driving typically is not what you see in the adverts. It's not driving along mountain passes and with no traffic around. It's much more monotonous and tedious than is often advertised. Huge amounts of free time that could be released if we can allow the vehicles to do some of the driving for us, and we can be productive or relax or socialize instead of having to pay attention to a very boring task. Second is around the use of vehicles. So vehicle is typically the most expensive thing that we buy. You know, second to our property, it's the most expensive thing that we buy. And we only use it for about 5% of the time. And the rest of the time it's sat around parked. Couldn't we use those vehicles for something much more productive, much more efficient, than just having them sit around all day doing nothing? So I think there's much more efficiency to be gained in how we use our vehicles. And then the third one, and for me the most important one, is around safety. So we know 1.25 million people die on the roads each year around the world, about 1 every 25 seconds. And we also know that about 95% of the collisions on the road have human error as a contributory factor. So can we start to use automation as a way to address that and reduce the risk of collisions on the road? And how do we do in the UK? Well, these are the stats on fatalities in the UK over the years, coming right back to the earliest recorded statistics in the 20s and 30s. You get an increase because in the 20s there weren't that many people driving around and the vehicles become more popular. A decrease in the post-war period as the country was getting back on its feet, and then again an increase as more and more people start to use the roads, and the roads are getting busier and busier and not enough being done to address safety issues. And then I think from the 60s, end of the 60s, when drink driving was made legal, that was a big factor in the reductions. You've got seatbelt campaigns coming in, that's another factor bringing us down. In the 90s, you got the Euro NCAP star ratings, which had a huge impact on the way vehicles are designed to improve safety. And we've come to a period now where there was a decrease towards the end of the 2000s, and I think that was related to economic factors. And we've now kind of plateaued, and if anything, just started slightly to increase. And a lot of people are seeing automation of the driving task as the next thing that's going to help us to continue that downward trajectory in the number of casualties on our road. So that's the number from the most recent statistics, so 5 or 6 a day. In terms of automation, there's, Night Rider is one thing, but there's a whole different number of levels of automation that have been classified by the SAE. So no automation, level 0 is a standard car with no kind of automated functions. Driver assistance, something like adaptive cruise control or lane guidance that will take over some parts of the driving task for you. Second level, partial automation, is where a number of systems work together, so adaptive cruise control and a lane guidance system working together, so that the driver doesn't have to interact with the vehicle for the vehicle to drive along the road. But the driver is required to maintain attention and a readiness to take over. The third level is where the driver doesn't need to pay attention, so the vehicle will look after the driver in that situation. It will take control of the longitudinal speed of the vehicle and the lateral position of the vehicle. And if the driver is required, there will be a process through which the driver is returned into the loop and resumes control. Then they got the higher levels, high automation and full automation. High automation is where the Google car is, level 4. So it will only operate in the areas where Google has those very detailed maps of the environment in California and in Texas, I think, at the moment. And full automation is a vehicle that could do everything that a regular car could do. You could tell it, I'm in Yorkshire Grey in London, I want to go to Glasgow, and it will do the complete journey for you without any interaction from the driver. Indeed, you don't need a driver in the vehicle at all. You could make deliveries, or a vehicle could go from one car share point to another car share point without any operation by a human driver. Now, there's a big... You see this as something, there's step 1, step 2, step 3, and it's all quite sequential. But there's a very big technological and regulatory difference between level 2 and level 3. So at level 2, you've still got the driver in the loop, or you should have, and the driver is therefore liable in the event of a collision. At level 3, the driver isn't required to pay attention. So we've already had Volvo and Mercedes saying, when we sell vehicles that have this functionality, we will take responsibility for collisions if there are collisions when the vehicle is operating in an automated mode. So there's a big difference between those, step 2 and step 3. But for the driver, for the operator of the vehicle, the difference is much more tenuous. It's at level 2, the vehicle seems to be doing everything, and I need to be alert, I need to watch the road and my surroundings, but I'm not having to do anything for most of the time, whereas at level 3 that is actually permitted. So some challenges around how a driver responds to level 2 and level 3 automation, and see some examples of that, particularly with the Tesla. So Tesla is an incredible vehicle, right? It's fantastic, incredible range for an electric vehicle. It has this autopilot functionality, and I think probably the most incredible thing is that autopilot functionality was delivered over the air. So you had version 6 software, and then through an update over the summer, if you paid Tesla some money, it would provide you with an update to the version 7, and the version 7 software, using the sensors that existed already on the vehicle, would enable you to have this autopilot functionality, which is level 2. Now, there are 2 videos I'm going to show you. The first one it's on YouTube. You can find it very easily. It's called "My Tesla Tried to Kill Me." And if you watch the video, you'll see it's on a country road, so it's not the environment in which you're supposed to use the autopilot functionality. It's designed for highways, and you'll see that it starts off quite nervous. It's kind of hunting around to find the center of the lane. And then at the end of the video, there would be, I'll do the beeps that would, oops, let me go back. There we go. Just need to start the video. Okay, great. So he's cruising along 30, 35 miles per hour. It's a country road, not a highway. Veers off to the right a bit, and then coming over the crest of the hill, the wheel turns to the left, and there's the beeps, and the guy had to take the wheel back. Now, in that situation, he was sort of allowing the vehicle to do the driving, and you could imagine he might do that drive every day, and 9 times out of 10 it would do the right thing, and he might choose to check his emails or something, and then would be expected with those beeps to get back into the loop and take over. So I think it's unacceptable, actually, that's the situation. I know there's, Elon Musk himself has said we're going to do more to place constraints on how the system is operated. But the flip side of that is the second video, which was subtitled "My Tesla Saved My Life." Okay, so you've got this wet road. There's a junction ahead on the right, slow traffic in the right-hand lane. The driver said he was looking at the traffic on the right-hand lane, and you'll see what happens. So this is with the driver made no interaction with the vehicle. So that vehicle pulled across last second. Driver knew nothing about it. The autopilot system slowed him down. The vehicle moved out of the way, and it continued driving. So that's how the automation systems should and could work to improve safety. But we've got this challenge around attention when necessary. Okay, so this is a future driver. This is Phoebe, my daughter, and thankfully I put speech bubbles on this because I knew that sometimes sound doesn't work. So if I can time this right, it should be about right. So I'd just shown Phoebe, she's 5 years old when this was taken. I'd just shown her a video of Mercedes' demonstration of driving one of the first journeys by the original Carl Benz vehicle, and it did it automated. So I showed her a video of that because that's what I do. And she said,
"So why would you like that car that drives itself, Phoebe?"
It has lights around the steering wheel. I mean, it drives by itself.
And why would that be good?
You get to be lazy.
so without any prompting from me, presentation gold. Yeah, it kind of illustrates how the Tesla system has those risks because people like to do other things. People like that monitoring, continuous monitoring task. We are not well designed to do that. So there are those risks in the design of the system. Okay, now I've got some slides on artificial intelligence, and I'm sure you're wowed by the graphical skills. I grew up using a VIC-20, so that's way better than anything I had. But this is about Murphy. This is Murphy, the dog, and this is your house. And oh no, there's a fire in the house, and we need to get Murphy out of the house. Fortunately, we have a robot, our AI-powered robot, who's flame retardant and can potentially rescue Murphy. So you tell the robot, quick, get Murphy out of the building. And the robot does nothing. You haven't defined what is Murphy, what does Murphy look like, what is the building, where is Murphy within the building, what does it mean to get Murphy out of the building. So you provide schematics of the house, provide a picture of Murphy, and you want Murphy far away from the house. So you provide the information, and the robot charges into life and enters the house through a side door. I couldn't do the animation of an opening door. And what happens? The robot ignites the gas main, sends Murphy scattered across the sky, Murphy's distance is increasing away from the reference point that you gave the robot. He has achieved what you set out, the task you designed for him, but not perhaps in the way you'd expected. So, okay, you've got a reset button. Replay the situation, and you think, okay, I can handle this now. What I will do is everything the same. I've provided a schematic. I've provided information about what Murphy is, but the building must remain intact. So the robot whirs into life, heads into the building, and this time throws Murphy out of the upstairs window, landing and dies on the floor. So, okay, press the reset button again. And this time, okay, I'm going to approach this with a different tack. What I'd like you to do is get Murphy out of the building in such a way that I don't press the reset button. So the robot whirs into life, goes into the building, blows up the house, and then out of the smoking wreckage shoots you with his laser and kills you before you can press the reset button. So a bit of a silly example, but even in that very simple example, when there are no further consequences to consider, there wasn't an easy way. There was so many things to consider about how you frame the problem, how you ask the intelligent agent to respond and behave, given all the factors that surround the task you're asking from it. So for AI, if you wanted this to work with automated vehicles, you need the system to understand the capabilities of the vehicle, so braking distance and the performance of the tires, the performance of the engine, how much the wheels can steer, what lateral Gs can be created. You need it to understand the problem space, so it's where Murphy is, the design of the building, but in driving terms, the rules of the road, where the vehicle is permitted to drive, the actions available to the vehicle, and also the implications of those actions. So, like we want the vehicle to behave in such a way that enables mobility, not to cause increased risk of collisions. And a real tough task in this is that driving is on robotics terms, is a known but unpredictable task. So it's known in that you know the rules of the road, you can know the environment through which the vehicle must travel, but it's unpredictable in that you never know what traffic situation you might encounter, what environmental conditions you might encounter, what pedestrians you might encounter, cyclists and so on, all this variability that we see all around us. How do you enable a vehicle to cope with all that level of unpredictability? You can't code rules for every single situation that the vehicle might encounter. You need a kind of flexible artificial intelligence method for giving the vehicle the instructions of how it should behave in every scenario. So, with that in mind, another thing that always gets mentioned in these kind of talks is the trolley problem. So I'm sure you come across it. You're at the points, runaway trolley, it will hit 5 workers on the tracks. If you pull the points, you will kill 1 worker on the points. So if through your actions you will save 5 lives, but you also kill someone who otherwise would be unharmed. Now, in that, given that situation, most people choose to pull the lever and to change the points, recognizing the benefit of saving 5 lives and killing 1. Another variant of this you may have seen is the large stranger version, where you're on a bridge and the same situation is there. The runaway trolley will kill 5 workers on the track, but if you push the large stranger off the bridge, the trolley will definitely stop in time. You'll kill the large stranger, but save the 5 lives. Now, in that situation, it's the same decision, but most people choose not to push the stranger off the bridge. There's all sorts of etiquette reasons why that might be the case. But interesting kind of formulation of the problem and trying to get into how people make ethical decisions. Now, these are these are the kind of decisions that an automated vehicle might have to make, and should it veer to the left or veer to the right?
This could get messy.
So I could say, well, you'd do one and then do the other as well. If you formulate this in driving terms, one you often hear is there's a mother with a pushchair and an oncoming truck. Should you swerve into the truck and kill the occupants of the vehicle, or swerve into the pedestrian with the pushchair and kill those pedestrians? So that you have to weigh that up in your mind. A similar one is motorbikes. So the vehicle has to make a decision. Should it swerve into the motorcyclist with a helmet or the motorcyclist without a helmet? Now, you might think, well, the motorcyclist without the helmet has been irresponsible, therefore possibly deserves what's coming to him. But if you're talking about minimizing harm, then you're better off hitting the guy with the helmet, because he has taken the safety precautions, and in 2 similar impacts, the guy wearing the leathers and the helmet is least likely to suffer serious injury. What about you can crash into a Fiat Panda or a Volvo? Like before, a Volvo is considered a safe, sturdy vehicle. Panda less so. Certainly that generation Panda. And so perhaps you choose to hit the Volvo. Well then, okay, what about if there's 1 occupant in the Panda but 3 in the Volvo? How would that change your decision making? How would you decide, weigh up the risks and benefits of hitting one or the other? So what we could do is ask members of the public what they would feel about these kinds of dilemma, these kind of decisions that we're potentially asking automated vehicles to make. And this is a study that was done over the summer. It's freely available online, where they pose some of these questions. So should the vehicle swerve into a wall? Should it, to avoid collisions, should it swerve and save 10 pedestrians, save 1 pedestrian? Kind of weigh up all those types of situation. And I won't go through the results they found in detail, but I think what's interesting is these tables show the percentage of the respondents who chose one thing or another. The yellow region being that the vehicle should stay on course. The orange region that it should be random, whether the vehicle swerves or stays on course. And the red region being that the vehicle should swerve. And there were 2 different forms where by swerving it would kill the occupants of the vehicle, or by swerving it would preserve the occupants of the vehicle. So what's interesting about this, aside from the real detail of it, is just how big the regions are. So there's no kind of consensus. You've got about a third of respondents saying the vehicle should stay on course, about just under a half saying the vehicle should swerve, and then a kind of undecided group who would let the decision be made by chance. So how do you program a vehicle to behave in the way that people consider that to deliver the best outcomes when there are quite big discrepancies between the numbers of people who would choose for the vehicle to stay on course or to kill the occupants or to kill the pedestrians ahead? It's. I would imagine they had more time than a vehicle would have or a driver would have, right? So they could weigh up the kind of relative risks of each behavior.
So to get an instinctive action, you have to put them onto a simulator, create the situations, and then see what people do.
If you believe the simulator would generate the level of risk and feelings of unsafe, you know you're not going to die in a simulator, or you shouldn't do.
Sorry to create a later Q&A, but
Yeah.
the purpose of this was to establish what people's considered opinion would be.
Yes.
And therefore then we might base our subsequent
Yes.
programming on that.
Yes.
And so if it's a considered opinion, then it's kind of sort of important what they had to think about it.
So it is, but I think the importance of the study is when we create vehicles and send them out from the factory, there will have been a time when people have considered how they should program the vehicle to respond in those dilemma situations. So they've had that time to consider what the vehicle should do, whereas a human driver doesn't have that time. And so I think that's why the dynamic is important in this decision, and why it's difficult when you see that there's such differences between populations of respondents. I don't know for certain. I would have thought so. Yeah, I would have thought so. I would have thought so. But the link is there for the full paper. Okay, so great graphics again, I know. Now come to what should we do? How should vehicles behave? And let's sort of start off by thinking, actually, driving isn't that difficult. There's only a few things you can do. You can accelerate, you can brake, steer to the left, steer to the right. That's pretty much it. And it's just how those actions affect the world around you. There's a few other things as well. You can sound the horn and flash lights to grab people's attention that way. So if you've got a vehicle, you can imagine a vehicle traveling at a steady speed, its area of influence is something like that. If the vehicle accelerates, brakes, the area of influence reduces, accelerates, it extends, steer to the left, steer to the right. These are the areas where the vehicle has to be certain that it will not have a collision, or if there is going to be a collision, how it can change its behavior in order to avoid one. And a really neat parallel, actually, is from the 1930s, and Gibson, J.J. Gibson, who was working on visual perception, visual behavior, had this idea. You can see these are kind of 1930s looking cars from the original paper from 1938, and the idea of affordances, and that drivers had a perceived field of safe travel, which is kind of relates to what I was describing, how an automated vehicle would need to have a perceived area of safe travel, and also not just how to get along its route in the optimal manner, but also what are my escape routes, where's my areas of refuge should someone get out of this car, for example, or someone run across the pavement from the side of the road. What are the escape routes that the vehicle can take? So at all times, the vehicle needs to be identifying what's its desired path in order to get from its origin to its destination. Where are these areas of refuge that it can swerve into should it need to? And then in terms of how it should behave in the event of a situation where a collision is unavoidable, classifying the things that it could collide with might be important. So the highest priority should be for humans and life forms that could be human. So it needs to understand what a life form is. High impact obstructions, so that might be the oncoming truck or a solid brick wall. Medium impact, low impact obstructions. This is just early ideas about how this classification system could work. There could be dozens of categories, but as an early formulation, understanding what different categories of collision impact objects might be will be important. And if a collision is unavoidable, you choose to crash into the thing that has the least impact, and you apply maximum brakes to ensure that the impact that you have is as low energy as possible and minimize harm to vehicle occupants and whatever it is you're hitting.
Sorry, can you explain again the
Yeah.
difference between those last two options?
So if a collision is unavoidable, there are two things that need to happen. You need to understand what things are you likely to hit, what things is it possible to hit, and then select the one with the lowest impact. So
those are complementary.
They're serial, if you like. Both things must happen in the event of an unavoidable collision. Select the thing with the least impact and maximize braking to minimize the energy and the impact in the collision. And then, sort of coming to the end of the presentation, I think sometimes ethics can be overblown, and it's sort of the thing that people put in the way of the development of automated systems. There are lots of automated systems that are in existence already, and we have tackled some of these issues. So the first point is that in the way automated vehicles are designed to operate, they will be much less likely to encounter those situations where a collision is unavoidable. When it's foggy, they will drive in a more risk-averse manner than humans do. When there are side roads where people might emerge suddenly, they will drive in a more cautious manner. So the chances are they will be much less likely to have that situation where it's an emergency, you need to swerve left into one collision target or right into another. So that would be much less likely to encounter that. And I also think that humans are pretty poor at making that decision anyway. And there's some, as we've seen in the paper, there's some big differences in what drivers would choose to do in situations that are presented to them. And another thing to think about is the behavior that you want the vehicle to adopt might be very different depending on who you have in the car with you. So, for example, if Phoebe is in the car with me, I might choose a very different course of action than if I'm in the car on my own. So there are some subtle differences that might cause big changes in how people would choose for the vehicle to operate. So in order to get around this, to overcome the challenge around ethics of the vehicle, we need clear testing procedures, and it's not easy to formulate what they might be because there is such variety. There's essentially an infinite number of different scenarios that the vehicle could encounter based on factors like weather, temperature, route environment, pedestrians, and so on and so on. There's infinite variability, but you would want to have some comfort that a large number of those situations had been addressed with your simulated testing. It wouldn't be possible to do these on a test track in a few days. This is millions and millions of different runs with a validated simulated process. You'd need a standardized way to record and then analyze and interpret the data that is collected by these vehicles in the event of a collision. So vehicles will have a huge number of sensors and recording equipment. How do you interpret that data to understand why the collision occurred and determine, was it something the driver did or didn't do? Was it something that went wrong with the vehicle systems, the sensors? Was it a sensor that failed? Was it something that was fundamental to the programming of the vehicle that resulted in the vehicle taking a path that resulted in a collision? And once you're able to do that reliably, it should have a much more objective process for determining fault in the event of a collision. And the process will be consistent, and it'll be possible to audit the way in which the vehicle behaved. And if there is, like the Tesla, if there are ways in which the operation of the vehicle can be improved through an over-the-air update, all the vehicles in the fleet can learn from the errors or the findings from these kinds of analysis, so that all the vehicles in the fleet behave much better, and we all benefit from the safety advantage that we gain from improving the program. It's like all the vehicles are going through a driving lesson and reaching a higher standard through the learning we can achieve in this process. Another kind of interesting fact that was brought to our attention at the Academy Symposium, of an annual event where we invite speakers, and there was a kind of a Lifetime Achievement Award. And one of our speakers was talking about Vision Zero. Are you aware of Vision Zero? This is a kind of Swedish idea that by 2020 there'll be no deaths or serious injuries on the road, and Volvo have embraced this, and it's driving a lot of their work around safety, that no one will die or be seriously injured in a Volvo by 2020. And his response to that is, you have to look at the risk of death on the road compared to the risk of death not on the road, in all other aspects of everyday life. And 10 years ago, that ratio was about 7 or 8 to 1. So 8 times more likely to die as a road user than just in everyday life. Through the 2000s, we've been reducing that quite dramatically, and we're now down to 3 to 1. And as you get closer to 1 to 1, then the investment you need to make in making the roads safer becomes less important, because you're as safe on the roads as you are in the rest of your life. So creating an environment where there are 0 collisions on the road or 0 fatalities on the road might be an inefficient use of resources when the risk in everyday life is sorry?
You can get ISIS to do it.
Yes, increase the risk in all other aspects of life. Yeah, that is another way to improve the ratio. Maybe that's why it's starting going down.
Why has it come down so fast?
Because the fatalities have been going down at a similar rate.
But that's halved in 10 years.
Yeah.
But the zero risk could just be an artifact of the changes. So we might have zero risk not because it was designed, but because the cars become so safe.
Yes.
When all the cars are talking to each other and all other driving is banned, then it might actually be an artifact of that system rather than what we're trying to achieve.
But then maybe you would want to cause the cars to drive faster. Yeah. Because as sort of optimizing the utility function of the vehicles. Yeah. I mean, it's the thing I find I really struggle with, and that's on the last slide, so I will come to that. It's important to recognize that fatal collisions, I talked about the huge numbers that there are across the world, but they are incredibly rare. So the Google cars, the fleet of Google cars have done over 1 million miles of testing, and they've had no at-fault collisions. They've had a few collisions where other vehicles have driven into them, but no at-fault collisions. And 1.2 million miles sounds amazing. The number of collisions, the number of fatalities on UK roads means there's 180 million miles of driving between each fatal crash. So there's a long way for Google to go before they could prove that fatalities are less likely in their vehicles. It is happening, it is changing. We've got the likes of Google, the likes of Apple, Uber, Tesla, and now, in response, Ford, GM, Mercedes, Toyota, Nissan, all coming out with their own concepts about what automated vehicles will be and how mobility will change. So, that getting to that point where vehicles can be used in a much more efficient manner, where the car sharing becomes much more viable, where electric vehicles become much more usable and more appropriate for the journeys we choose to make. That's all happening. The vaccine model is an interesting one. I think it's relevant to this discussion. So that for every drug that's sold, the manufacturers contribute to a pot. For every vaccine that's sold, the manufacturers contribute to a pot. And if there are injuries that can be proved to be caused by the vaccine, because that does happen, people do suffer serious consequences as a result of taking a vaccine, which should be there to reduce the likelihood of harm. That fund is there to pay out to people who suffer those injuries. So maybe there's something where people selling automated vehicles contribute to a pot. Anyone suffering injuries receives a payout from that fund. So maybe that's a way to address these risks, certainly in the short term. Deontological ethics, so following rules, I think is difficult because there's an infinite variability in the environment, so you can't create rules for the behavior of the vehicle. Consequential ethics, asking the vehicle to produce the best outcomes is difficult because it depends who's deciding what the best outcome is, and we've seen there's variability between individuals on what they see the best outcome as being. And virtuous ethics, how do you decide what that virtuous behavior is? It's all kind of unsatisfactory. Just need to be much more pragmatic and go through those testing process, those data collection and analysis process, and make improvements over time. And we will see vehicles that are very cautious. We've seen the Google car was pulled over for driving too slowly recently, and that will extend as we become more confident in the programming of our vehicles. And a point I'd like to close on really is, when would it be considered unethical not to use vehicles that are automated? We know there are 5-6 people today who will have died as a result of driving on the roads. 10 times that number suffered serious life-changing injuries. I think if automated systems could have been a factor in reducing the risk or preventing the collisions that caused those injuries, we have to start thinking about that. And not just from a safety point of view, but also for the mobility of the elderly, for the disabled, how to maintain independent mobility as we have an aging population, and also for the environment as well. So can we use automated vehicles as a shared asset, shared mobility, to improve the air quality in our cities and to improve the environment for walking and cycling as well. So I think I'm going to close there, but it's a really interesting topic, and I really look forward to your questions after the break. Thank you very much.